I guess I'll just kick it off here as your facilitator. This is a meeting of the Vermont Climate Council. We're doing our usual Zoom meetings where councilors are encouraged to keep your camera on if you can, if you're in a place where you can do that. And folks who are joining us who aren't councilors, we ask you to keep your camera off until we get to the public comment period. And the same in terms of use of chat. And yes, Jane, your volume was a little bit low, so I'm not quite sure what that means in terms of us being able to hear you in this meeting, but it might have been just a little interference too initially. So as usual, there is an agenda online, and maybe someone, Marion or someone could drop it in the chat. I can do that myself, actually. And we are just an hour and a half today. And so our intent is to stay focused on our agenda. And if there are things that come up we want to schedule for the future, let's name those. Okay, so welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and jump in. The agenda that you can see, if you click through for what's in the chat, we're basically trying to do three things today. One is recognize that there's some changes in membership happening. And for those who are stepping off the council who are with us today, we want to say farewell and say thanks. And so we're going to take a moment to do that. The heart of our meeting is about the annual report that ANR has to send in on Friday this week. And so we're going to spend a little time on that report and the draft. And our goal is to take a set of notes together that we all agree on that will be last revisions to that report that we'll ask Jane to do on your behalf. And then the final thing we want to do today is talk about next steps for you all as a council. And there's a specific proposal that's been emerging from the steering committee meetings about trying to get together once we have the new composition of the council or the new House appointments to get together and really have a conversation about the role of the council this year and next, and spend a little time thinking strategically there as a council. So those are the things we want to do today, are those three things. And before we jump into them, any concerns about the agenda and doing those things? All good? Okay. Great. So why don't we go ahead and do it? We have our usual administrative thing about approving the previous meeting's minutes. And that would be the November 14th minutes, if I'm looking at this correctly. And you can click through the agenda to look at them. So I'll give folks a moment if anybody needs to do a final quick click through the agenda to do that. So let me just give a second here. Are there any concerns about the notes or any requests for a little more time about approving the November 14 notes? Okay. I'm not seeing any concerns. I'm not seeing any requests for more time, so let's consider those approved. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so now let's do this first thing we want to do in the agenda, which is recognize that there's going to be some changes in the composition in the council. Billy Costa, your audio is on, just so you know. And a few folks are stepping off. Some folks are continuing from the House appointments, and we will eventually get new appointments. Jane, is there anything you want to say as we prep up this section about saying farewell to some folks?
Sure. Maybe just for everybody's context, I think you all know this, but the original term for the House appointed members was a 2-year term, so that the transition from the Senate and House appointments wouldn't all happen at once. Going forward now, the new appointments from the House are for 3-year terms to mirror what the Senate appointments look like. So we had 8 counselors representing various interests who expired in November of this year. And hence why we had to cancel December's meeting, as we realized that carryover language for appointments for the legislature, legislatively appointed members are not the same as executive branch appointments, was the interpretation we got. 5 of the 8, well, I should say 4 of the 8 counselors who were stepping off have asked to be reappointed and have officially been reappointed. So Liz Miller, Johanna Miller, Graham Kleppner didn't need to be oh yeah, you did need to be reappointed, and you were reappointed. And there's one more that, my apologies, that I'm not remembering who the 4th one is, who was reappointed. Sorry. And it'll come. Oh, Rich Cowart. Thank you, Jared, so much. How could I forget you, Rich? So thank you. Thank you to the 4 of you for staying with us. So those 4 have been reappointed. Dr. Leslie Ann Dupini-Giroux is also up, and she has been, we have indicated to the speaker that Leslie Ann would like to be reappointed. And we have not heard from the speaker yet on that appointment. So Leslie Ann is with us today listening in, but is not officially a counselor right now, as she has not been reappointed. And then 3 seats representing municipalities, Chris Campany, representing rural Vermonters, Catherine Dimitrick, and then representing the fuel sector, Brian Gray, have chosen to not be reappointed and are moving on. And so I did just want to offer space to hear from them and really further my appreciation for all the work those counselors did, standing up the first climate action plan and working through the process to stand up the council. And it's been a real privilege from where I sit to work with all 3 of them, and just really wanted to provide a space to say an overwhelming thank you from my seat, as well as allow them to say some parting words, and for you all to say what you would like to say too, and just appreciate that this is the first transition for the council, and give a space to honor that and update on where we're going. So thank you so much for Catherine and Chris making the time to be here at the beginning of this meeting. And we'll turn it back to you, David, to carry this forward.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. So I think it is, I mean, not to put you all on the spot, but Chris and Catherine, if there's anything you'd like to say to your fellow counselors as you're making this transition, here's a great opportunity to do that. And again, no pressure, but certainly an opportunity if there's things you want to say about this. And obviously the 2 of you have been incredibly active members of the council and very, very productive members of the council. So I know there's going to be, sort of big shoes to fill on this, but let me turn it first to Chris and Catherine, and then over to Rich and others that might want to say a few words as well. Chris, Catherine, anything you'd like to say as we're finishing up here?
Sure. I'll just say thanks to everybody. I want to extend a special appreciation to Erica, the co-chair of the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee. I think we built a really amazing committee and did some really great work. And I look forward to participating in whatever way makes sense in the ongoing work on the Municipal Vulnerability Index and the Resiliency Toolbox that Marion and Jane are leading. And I just, it was a very challenging couple of years. Everybody worked really hard, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what the council accomplishes in the coming years with the big lift of the first plan being done, and just encourage everybody to stay true to the just transitions principles and to recognize the impact that all of this work has on our rural communities and the people who live there, and look forward to participating more in legislative efforts and other policy implementation related to the plan. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Catherine. Chris?
Yeah, just thanks to everybody for this journey. It's kind of bittersweet to be departing, but one of the reasons I wanted to depart was frankly to help implement what's in the climate action plan. And so much of it comes together at the regional level. So many different policy initiatives that the state takes on, and legislation, and then there are what the towns need to actually help implement this too. So I didn't come off to no longer be a part of this climate work, but to actually help better implement it. it was great. I learned so much being part of the Just Transition Subcommittee, and from the people participating in that. I guess if I had two parting words of recommendation, I would really encourage folk, the council, if at all possible, maybe a couple of times this year, to try to get together in person. I think it's important for people to create more human bonds with one another. I know folk within the administration generally are more familiar with each other, and folk who kind of have more of a regular advocacy role with the legislature and with the agencies. A lot of folk already know each other and have probably been in lots of meetings together, but there are a lot of counselors who've never been in the same room with all these people. And so I just think it'd be really helpful for you guys to get to know each other more as individuals, Vermonters, human beings, because that's the way we've evolved over a really long period of time. So when you're able to, I'd recommend you doing it, because the task that you're still charged with is remarkable, right? We're completely reorienting our relationship as a society to how we relate to energy and land use and a lot of other things. So that's a pretty major task that the council was tasked with in a little less than 2 years to come up with a plan to do that. So you still got a lot of that work to go. The other thing too that I would just really encourage the council to support is reaching out to the broader community about what this means at like the household and business level. I know it's easy to have the policy discussions, but my bigger concern, I guess, is really beginning to communicate more to Vermonters now about what all this stuff means. Not just the pros and the cons, but just the realities of it, not just why we're doing it, but what does this look like at the household and business level? So to the extent that more of those kind of conversations could happen, that would be awesome. And I stand ready to help do that. We're already going to Wyndham Regional Commission is already going to try to do that in our own way, but would hope that the council can have some leadership in that realm too. If I can ever be of any service, let me know. I'm not by no means am I gone, and look forward to seeing what awesome work you guys do going forward. And thanks so much.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Catherine. So you've been seeing in the chat, there's some appreciations happening. Rich, let me turn it over to you.
Well, I'm sure that I'm speaking for many people here in thanking you all for your really substantial commitments and for your insights over the past couple of years. I'm personally going to miss what you all have contributed. And as Chris just said it really well, that we need to focus on what this means at the household and business level. But what you all have touched on, that it seems to me so important that as a council, we've had to focus on mitigation, of course, because we're required to do that. But while we do that, to focus also on equity and resilience and the impacts on Vermonters of all types, what you've helped us to see over the past couple of years has really been substantial. So I, for one, am going to miss you. And I want to thank you for your service.
Thanks, Rich. So if others would like to say something in the chat or verbally, please go ahead. Like Chris and Catherine, as they say, are not disappearing. They're going into another, doing all their day jobs, which involves this work too. June, go ahead.
I don't know that I'm saying anything new. Both Chris and Catherine are well aware of my fondness and high regard that I have for them personally. If you're not, now you are. But as a member of the administration, I just want to say there are so many times where I have felt that you've stepped into the gap and functioned as the connecting glue in this group. And everybody here plays that role. So tearing you out because it's your time to go hurts. I trust others will come who will take your place, but they will not replace you. And on behalf of the people of Vermont for whom we all work and endeavor and search and aspire, I just thank you so much for your generosity of spirit and your collegiality and your selfless dedication to this work that we're doing in a time of uncertainty. It's people like you who shine a light and help us forward when we don't always know what we're doing, but we know we need to do something. So thank you both.
Thanks, June.
I feel like I should step down from committees more often because this is really cool.
Get a lot of love.
Well, just thanks again to everybody. It's been a real pleasure, and carry on. I look forward to seeing great things. Fantastic.
All right. Well, wonderful. And Catherine and Chris, you're welcome to stay on and participate, listen in. And you're also welcome to hit the leave meeting button if you would prefer.
I hope you have a wonderful rest of your meeting.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Okay. Super. All right, so let's get into the biggest thing we're trying to do today, which is feel comfortable with the annual report that Jane has circulated around. I wanted to kick this off, turning it over to Jane first. This is one of these reports, the versions that got sent out kept getting better from your feedback. So I think Jane wanted to make sure she gives you a roadmap into what this latest version looks like vis-a-vis what the first version looked like. And if there's anything else, Jane, you wanted to say to prep up folks. Again, the goal of our conversation, I'm suggesting, should be a shared set of notes. I'll take them and then share them on my screen. And we want to, as a council, agree on those notes at the end of this conversation. So that's what I recommend we're going to try to do here today. But Jane, let me turn it over to you to give us a walk through this version and anything else that you want to say about the feedback you've gotten so far.
Okay, thank you. So yes, David alluded to the fact that a week prior to last Friday, I shared with you all the initial draft of the legislative report and asked for you all to provide me any feedback directly to me as of Friday morning last week so that I could update it and provide you with a more current draft for today's meeting. So I sent out on Friday afternoon, and I had been updating it along the way online. So the version online was continually changing, but then I sent the revised PDF as a still document on Friday, and wanted to reiterate the changes, the substantive changes that I made between the Friday I first sent it out and the Friday of last week, so that you all know, since I didn't carry forward my apologies track changes. The majority of the edits, which were really helpful, were largely grammatical or typo catches that people made. So thank you for doing the deep dive reads that you did. And to those of you who did that, I really appreciate it. And it was great to get that support from you.
Jane, can I just interrupt for 1 second? If there is a way to be a little closer to wherever that mic is in the room, there's some interest in getting you a little bit louder if it's possible. I don't know how that is in your room there.
Yeah, it's TV. Switch to your laptop. Can you switch the mic to your laptop? No, because my laptop's terrible. You call it.
It's okay. It's not terrible if you just.
No, and I don't know if it's just me and being the hearing impaired one in the room. It's just I have the closed captions on, so I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, Jane, if you can just do your presenting at the front of the room voice, that'd be ideal. Yes.
Wait, my father used to make me project my voice as I was a child across the dining room table. So I'm going to be
that's the one.
Childhood scars. Okay, so there were only 3 substantive changes that were made, and I highlighted those in the email that I sent on Friday afternoon to you all. If you didn't see it, I'll just highlight those briefly for you. there was a sentence that was added under implementation that really highlighted the role of the legislature in needing to act on the recommendations in the climate action plan. Under the technical analyses section, under the final pathways analysis, there was a larger comment made about the economic analysis that hadn't been put in that paragraph that I added in. And then finally, under the climate action plan update section, I had pointed towards the recommendations in the transportation memo that you all adopted at our last meeting, but hadn't sort of crafted a way to cleanly recognize that the signal that you also made in the memo around signaling the only known policy mechanisms to confidently reduce emissions were through a performance standard or a cap and invest. So with the help of Joey, I put in the sentence that is highlighted in the email that it adds in that sentence that wasn't a recommendation per se, but was really a substantive component of the transportation memo. So those were the three big changes that I made throughout the legislative report. Since sharing it on Friday, there have been two more substantive comments that I've received from counselors that I'd like to highlight today for part of the notes and conversation. The first is that, and I agree that this is really likely a good approach from my vantage, is that the biomass recommendations, which have not been taken up by the council yet, are linked as draft at the end in the update section to signal the progress and work in that area. But because they've really only been vetted by a task group, should not be linked in this legislative report and just spoken to as the work in progress. And so I'd like to remove the hyperlink from the legislative report and any context perhaps around that. So that would be one comment carrying forward. And then second, in the transportation section, in addition to signaling the policy mechanism or driver that would likely get us to reduce our emissions in a confident way, is also there a key component of that memo was the appreciation of the work that AOT is leading in advancing the carbon reduction strategy. And while that's not a council-led initiative, it is very intricately tied now to the recommendations in the transportation memo. And so carrying forward the paragraph that speaks to the carbon reduction strategy in the transportation memo into the body of the legislative report is something we would also like to do. So those are the only two additional substantive recommendations that I'd like to carry forward and to represent in the notes today for us to agree upon at the end of the council. You're muted now, David.
Sorry, just unmuting. Okay, great. So there's three things that came out in your email, and now there's two others that aren't reflected in the document yet, but you are suggesting should be based on feedback that you've received, right? And the two that aren't yet reflected in the document are removing that hyperlink to the task group recommendations on biomass because the council hasn't worked on those yet and approved them. And the second is carrying forward a paragraph from the transportation memo that speaks specifically to the, and I'll get the name wrong. Can you say it, Jane, one more time? The transportation carbon reduction plan, what it's called?
The carbon reduction strategy.
Carbon reduction strategy. Okay. So those are the two things you would, based on feedback you've heard since then, you would like to fix in the document, but they're not fixed yet. Okay, yeah. Great. Okay, so that's the intro. Jared, hand up. Are you reacting to the last two things that Jane said or something else?
No, I wanted to first just thank Jane for the work in putting this together and everybody else for kind of carefully reviewing it and adding suggestions. And then I wanted to apologize, but I did another read through just this morning and want to suggest one other proposed change that I'm going to put in the chat so people can, it's an accuracy thing on a title and a description of a report. But I'm going to put that in the chat now, but I want to add that to the list for us to consider and hopefully include in the revisions.
Can you just say something about it in addition to putting in the chat? It says,
So at the bottom of page 7, there's a section that is currently titled Mitigation Cost Curve Life Cycle Analysis, which the actual name of that report, which is not the most kind of intelligible or user-friendly name, was the Marginal Abatement Cost Curves report. So I think if we're going to speak about it, we should at least use the name of the report. And I think the way that it is now, it potentially could have been a copying and pasting thing. It could confuse people between reports that were done about marginal abatement cost curves versus life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. So I think that use the name of the report and not confuse things by talking about a life cycle analysis in a place where there is not a life cycle analysis. That's happening in a different section. And then the other thing is that in the description of that report, the draft as it stands now says that the report provided or provides additional analysis of the costs over time for the measures needed to meet our emissions reduction requirements. That's not quite accurate. The report provided analysis of the projected net costs and savings. A number of these measures result in net savings, not net costs. So I don't think we want to just talk about one side of the equation. So yeah, for accuracy and balance, I would just suggest that we more clearly describe that report as it is, which is providing additional analysis of the projected net costs and savings over time of the measures needed to meet the emissions reductions requirements.
Okay, nice, helpful. All right, so we've got some suggestions here, both two that Jane just said, and these last two that Jared just said. I'm just pasting it into my document here so we have it to summarize. Just quickly, for other folks, other counselors who've gone through the report, any other things to put on the table, like what Jared just did, or any reactions to what you've heard from Jane on these last two and what Jared just said in the chat? Any last things that we need to put on the table here in terms of modifications, revisions, improvements to this report? Okay. So let's just summarize what's being said here. Again, I'm going to share my screen, and you have in the chat Jared's thing. That's probably actually a little bit better than what you're going to see on my screen. I hear 4 things being put on the table in terms of changes. The first 2 were the ones that Jane just said: remove that hyperlink to the task group recommendations because the council hasn't reviewed or approved them yet. And then carry forward a paragraph in the transportation memo about the carbon reduction strategy, as in carry forward into this report. Jared's 2 are right here. And those I just tried to cut and paste from the chat, Jared. So I guess what I'd want to test with folks is with these 4 changes. And Jane, I want to make sure you're looking at the changes that Jared's showing as well, making sure that they're not contradicting what you understand, the names of the reports and all that stuff. It's all good? Okay, yeah. I just want to, for all counselors, any concerns about doing these 4 things? And if you do these 4 things, are you comfortable with this report going in on Friday? I see some thumbs up. Any concerns from folks that you want to raise up now? I see a lot of thumbs up. Thanks. Okay. Great. So I'm not hearing any concerns. I think one of the things we could do is, and when we take public comment in a moment, perhaps there's something that you want to react to if something comes up in public comment. But for right now, what I'm seeing is that with these 4 changes, this report's feeling like a good representation of the work and what you talked about back in November. Okay, great. I wonder if what we might want to do, because we're doing pretty well on time, is have that conversation about meetings in 2023 and then go to public comment and then give you some time to react to both things if there's something in the public comment. So if folks are okay with that, why don't we just keep moving forward on the work, and that will allow folks in the public, yes, and absolutely want to hear from the public on this. And I'm actually interested to hear from the public on the other thing too that the council wants to talk about, which is the meetings in 2023. So if folks are okay with me doing this slight modification of the agenda because we have more time than we thought, I would like to just go roll right into this idea of getting together early this year in person and then going to the public comment. And we'll hit that public comment in time for that, where it is on the agenda at 1:05. Okay, so let's talk about what's being suggested here for this year. And this is something that steering committee members can speak to because we've spoken about it at least once in the steering committee and it came out of there. And I think Chris Campany implored you all to do that as well, which is thinking about an in-person meeting once the new members are appointed by the House, and also when there's a new facilitation contract in place, and being able to come together maybe, and Jane even has some ideas on timing on this, and come together as a council to really have a strategic conversation about what you want to be doing in the role of the council this year, next year, as it prepares to update the plan in subsequent years. So I don't know if anybody in the steering committee wants to just say a word about how that conversation has happened. Jane, if you want to say a word about timing, some thinking that you've had around that. So let me just invite steering committee members and Jane to weigh in a little bit on this idea, and then let's open it up to full council about the plan.
I'm happy to start. I think that, and I hope other steering committee members, or not other, steering committee members, period, step in and clarify anything, but there's been a lot of conversation about what it means to update the current climate action plan versus sort of like appreciating the initial climate action plan is done now, and what this period of council work looks like between the current plan and implementing it versus the next iteration. So how do we make that distinction between the current plan and moving forward with a process that sets us up for the next climate action plan and when it comes out? So I think there is a need for a conversation around that. There's also been some learning and guiding through the document that we originally set up for the council as a process roadmap, and some need to re-envision and review that document to get us on good, strong footing for the development of future plans and work in the meantime. And then finally, I'll just say that there's been, shifts and things happening with subcommittees, and a large conversation around, one, staffing those subcommittees, counselors leading them, there's transition there, as well as sort of the role of subcommittees and what is expected of them between now and the next iteration of the climate action plan. And that might be different for science and data and just transitions versus the other three. But I think a real conversation about the infrastructure and needs and work of this council between now and the next plan is well timed right now, as we wrap up transportation and biomass in this early part of this new year, and move on to think about what's next. And so I'll just propose, David alluded to the contract with Consensus Building Institute is wrapping up on Friday. We will close out the contract with CBI. The Agency of Natural Resources had an open RFP to bring on new facilitation services to support the Climate Council's work. And that contract will also carry in it some components that were in the previous climate access contract that looked more at supporting public engagement, and try to marry that work together. We had two excellent proposals, and the task group who helped A&R select a bidder has picked an awarding consultant to work with. And we're currently negotiating that contract right now and drafting it. So I can't share the name of the winning consultant because we haven't actually, it's not signed yet, but we are advancing the development of a contract to continue facilitation services for the council, as well as further support the work that you've all committed to for public engagement. And the climate office is committed to, I should say. And so, yes, so that will hopefully be in place sometime in February, as well as the new House appointments, which feel like critical seats for us to have in place for us to carry the work forward. And so my suggestion, just to have something hard to think about, is that the legislature takes a week off at the end of February to town meeting day. And my suggestion would be that the Monday before town meeting day might be a nice time for a longer in-person meeting of the council. Happy to workshop that with all of you, doodle poll it, but just wanted to put that out as the timeline that we'd like to shoot for, and perhaps even have a hard date of March 6th as the actual day for the council to come together in person in likely central Vermont somewhere.
Super. Okay. Thanks, Jane. All right, so that's the logic. Anything else? And feel free, other counselors too, but particularly steering committee members that have talked a little bit about this in the past. Reactions to this, does this sound like a good plan? Do you have some concerns about it? For it to be successful, what would you want to see in this kind of meeting? Just general reactions. Michelle?
I would just note, and I'm not sure how many people this would impact outside of myself, but many of us who work in the State House day to day between January and the end of May, this is the only week during the entire session that we can take a break. So I'm not sure if that would impact others, but I know I would not be able to attend a meeting the Monday before town meeting break because I'll be away.
Okay, thanks, Michelle.
Sorry, I couldn't find my hand, David. It's Liz. I had the same thought. So I echo that. Other scheduling, I think, could make a lot of sense for in-person. I don't think that week probably will work for some folks, including some state folks who are, following and helping with the council.
Quick question. So if that week, because it's a break from the legislative session, feels like not a great week, what would be a smarter week for folks who are concerned about that? Week? What's a better option, knowing that the legislative session will be, in full swing?
Mondays are traditionally days that the legislature doesn't meet, at least early in the session. So could be a Monday.
So better to do a Monday any other week than that week, basically. Okay.
And I'm noticing Jane just in the chat, they meant to suggest Monday, March 13th, which addresses a good number of those concerns.
Calculation. Sorry, I was looking at like school break versus town meeting break. Sorry. Julie just corrected me, who's here with me.
So can we back that up for 1 second then? So if Monday the 13th of March, it doesn't run into the problems that Michelle was saying or Liz was saying?
Yeah, it would be right before the legislature comes back into session after their week off of town meeting week, which is when people would be off and traveling.
Got it. Okay. All right. So the 13th sounds like a winner. All right. Potentially. Sue, go ahead.
Thank you for this. I fully support the idea of an in-person. Did we suggest an entire day? Because I guess I would recommend it be more like half a day. I don't know that it's realistic to be able to devote a whole day, nor necessary in terms of the time commitment. So, but I think it's great. There's a lot to discuss, and being in person would be awesome. Thanks. We had one of our Just Transition subcommittee meetings in person, and it was so uplifting. Thanks.
Thanks. So, okay. All right. So I'm hearing a request that maybe we don't eat the entire day. Okay. Yeah. Great. June, go ahead, please.
I wish I could join in the dominant view here, but I just don't. I do not think this is necessary. But if we're going to do it, I would ask for a hybrid option. It's just not clear to me what people are going to do in person that they don't do online. And somebody's got to say it, so I'm saying it.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Other reactions? Okay. Now, Jane, could you clarify in your mind if there would be other council activity between now and this date? Are you imagining other council activity given the two constraints you mentioned, which is not having the House appointees, those three seats, and also maybe not having a facilitation contract in place?
This is a question for the council. The largely only substantive issue remaining from the agenda that we had to cancel in December is the biomass task group recommendations. And so we have felt internally that appreciating that the seats that are not filled right now have a large stake in those recommendations, that it makes sense to wait for those seats to be filled before we advance those. But that's a decision for the council to make, really, I believe. So that's something to ask all of you. But that would be a question also if the meeting that we chose to have in person would be one where we took up work of the council like biomass, or we're really having a larger process-based conversation about the role of the council and work planning. And I would argue if you were trying to do a half-day meeting, that would be very hard to sort of shift between taking up the biomass task group recommendations and larger process-based questions and conversation that might make for better fodder if we weren't also taking up meaty recommendations. But again, discussion for all of you. And I would imagine that as we get closer to that date, we would meet with the steering committee to plan the agenda.
Yeah. Yep. So, so if I were to summarize here, March 13th as a date seems to make sense. While there are some questions, such as what June brought up about whether in-person really is highest value, for many of you, it does seem like a good high value activity to come together in person, particularly to do this more sort of strategy conversation about what you as a council want to be doing in the next year or two. There is a question about whether you want to try to meet before then. And, you know, Jane saying, it just so happens those three seats have big stake in how you talk about that biomass conversation. Any reactions to whether you want to be meeting between now and then to look at those biomass recommendations, whether you want to postpone that till you have those seats filled? What are people feeling about that? Bram?
I think that we should not discuss substantive changes that will affect the areas represented by those three seats while those three seats are empty.
Thanks, Bram. Do others sort of share that? Do people have different views about that? Yeah, a thumbs up from June, thumbs up from Sue. Okay, great. Jared? All right. So just to be clear, you all are basically saying, let's focus when we have the three seats filled, when we have the facilitation contract in place. March 13th looks like a good date. While it's not universal, there's a fair number of voices saying in-person sounds good. And then do the biomass, if not there, shortly thereafter, when you have all the right people to have that conversation. Okay. That's what I'm hearing. Okay. Anything else on this subject of sort of organizing yourselves over the next few months? Okay, great. Jane, am I forgetting anything that we were hopeful to have some definition on from the council?
Nope, I think that all sounds great.
Okay. All right. Thanks, folks. All right, so now we've got two things to turn to public comment on. The first conversation about finalizing that report, and now the second conversation about how to be organized in your work in the coming months. So let's go ahead and turn to public comment. I'll open it up as usual. Please raise your hand in the Zoom space. The chat is a perfectly acceptable place to drop a comment as well. So I'll just invite folks who would like to make a comment. Now's a good time. And I saw that Cheryl had wanted to earlier. So Cheryl, I'll go back to you. There you are. Okay. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Hi, thanks. I have to leave my camera off. My bandwidth is very low right now.
Okay, yeah.
I do have a few comments on the document. A couple of terminology and there's some grammatical issue. I don't know if you changed it in the new one or not, but comprises is the way to say that rather than is comprised of. That's don't use is comprised of. Use is composed of or else comprises. On page 3 and other places, the working lands is terminology that has been called out as offensive, and it's part of the recommendations from, I think, from Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee at one point to go through, documents in the whole state of government of the Vermont government in order to get those damaging words out. And so at the very least, it shouldn't be in this Climate Council documents. Additionally, things like low grade lumber and other things like that. I don't remember where that recommendation was, and so I couldn't bring it up for you, but I do recall that. On page 4, the clean heat standard was brought up as something that should have gone through, and additionally, along with TCIP. Well, the clean heat standard was done without the input of the Ag and Ecosystems Subcommittee, incorporating items related to issues the subcommittee discussed that they pointed out were controversial and needed more research, mainly biofuels. The biomass task group indicated that biofuels needed to be addressed, and some thought that they'd also be looking at that initially. And then, of course, the scope was discussed on many of the initial meetings, and then it wasn't discussed. They narrowed the scope. So many people think that the clean heat standard would have been detrimental to climate change mitigation and biodiversity. A lot of people think that, scientists as well. And the biomass task group confirms it. Page 10, public engagement. So very vocal voices of scientists and activists and groups. For example, Standing Trees, 350 Vermont, Vermonters for a Clean Environment, Biofuel Watch, and things like that have not been listened to. This is just a complaint on it. I don't know how to change it, but they haven't been listened to, let alone lifted up, including some very important recommendations from Ag and Eco Subcommittee and the Biomass Task Group. And now again, on page 12, the biomass section, the recommendations, which were initially from Ag and Eco last year, and then omitted and to instead form that task group. And they were not used in the last legislative session. And now again, they're not being included. And it's 2 meetings of the VCC that they haven't been looked at. And I understand why they weren't looked at in the December meeting. And now, they're being put off again. They're incredibly important, and they have great implications with regard to actually clean energy, actually clean heat, and biodiversity. And it will not be possible to be effective in reducing carbon dioxide or CO2 equivalents and addressing the biodiversity crisis without addressing biomass and biofuels. So now again, in conversation here today, it's the recommendations are being put off one more time. Not one more time. I mean, I don't even know how long it is at this point. People with vested interests are making decisions on biomass and biofuels. And I think it's a mistake. That's my comment.
Thanks, Cheryl. Appreciate those comments. I see a hand from Judy Dow as well. Judy, go ahead, please.
Yes, as a member of the Ag Ecosystem and Biomass Task Force and Life Cycle Analysis Committee, I'm beginning to feel like the bastard child. Could you please tell me if there are any BIPOC members on Just Transition and Climate Council?
Is that a question for Jane?
It's a question for whoever can answer it for me. I don't believe a BIPOC. I believe everything Cheryl said was correct, and I don't believe a BIPOC position is being presented as well. Or considered.
Well, Commissioner Chen is a BIPOC member of the council right now. And Leslie Ann Dupini Giroux is has been a member of the council and intending to be reappointed. So we have some council representation, and there is clearly on Just Transition. So. And
are they representing a BIPOC position, or are they representing some other position like rural or whatever?
There's no seat in the law for the council to represent a BIPOC position on the council. So no. And
not in Just Transitions either.
There are multiple members on Just Transitions, and I believe that many were sought out to represent BIPOC views on Just Transitions. Yes.
Because it does not seem right to exclude them, and does not seem right to have BIPOC positions considered. And I agree with everything Cheryl said, but especially the fact that if you don't have a meeting till March 13th to discuss the biomass recommendations, legislation will have gone on for January, February, and part of March. Decisions will have been made without this knowledge. And I'm sorry, but that is not right. I understand you have busy schedules, as do I. It still needs to be addressed and not put off. Can I have a comment, please, on that?
I'm not quite sure who to comment, but Judy, I'll just reiterate the reason for not addressing what I heard from counselors now. The reason for not addressing biomass is because the 3 seats that are not filled as of now, as of this year, are the ones that are most connected to biomass issues, the 3 seats on the council. And so the council.
Do you have the number you need to meet a quorum?
It's not a quorum issue. It's not a quorum issue. What I heard from counselors, it was an issue of, because those voices, because it's fundamentally rural voices, won't be appointed yet. Counselors were asking to hold off on the conversation until they are.
Well, I'm asking that you not hold off on the conversation.
Great.
I'm asking that this report includes some comments on it. It's not even addressed that it happened, that we did 10 months of work on it. There needs to be something that addresses it, that you have an opinion on it, but that you're missing. I mean, like I said, I'm beginning to feel like you don't care about these 2 departments. We work for years on the Ag and Eco, and our work just sits there. Biomass is 10 months and it sits there. You can't keep doing this and finding one more excuse after another. We were told this January meeting would address it. We were told that on the biomass committee.
Okay. So
can I please have a comment to address why, other than those 3 people are not going to be there, why with a quorum you still cannot address it?
So how about this, Judy? Let's do any other public comment that's here, and then let's open up a conversation amongst the counselors in reaction to what you're saying. So I'd be interested to hear from counselors in just a second about that and other pieces of the public comment that are coming out.
Will I be able to participate in the conversation with them when they give their responses?
I don't know. Maybe folks will ask for your help with that. Yeah. I'll leave that up to counselors for sure.
Well, then I'm not, if that's not a possibility, I'm not leaving this position of the one who gets to speak until somebody comments on it.
David, may I say something?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I can hear the frustration, Judy, and if I were in your position, I would feel that way too. And I think I would make the same critique of the process. For me, inescapably, this is an important issue. And the fact is that, as Bram pointed out, we are missing members. I don't know if we could or should have anticipated that when it was last represented to you that this would be resolved at today's meeting. I have no memory. But I can say that given the transition we're in, with 3 folks missing who are also critical to doing the work of the council, I really can't see going forward on it without having those folks seated first. That's all.
And I would like to respond to that, please, June.
Sure.
Thank you for your comments. I brought it up last week at the Social Equity Caucus with the legislators. There are 400 members of BIPOC people and legislators. And I told them what was happening. And they said they purposely stagger the people so there'll be a quorum on these committees. So you never have to do this. You can always move forward.
Yes,
so the
you're right.
legislative body is intending for you to move forward.
That is, as a matter of authority, absolutely correct. As a matter of law, absolutely correct. We have just had a conversation about the imperative of meeting in person because we're trying to build relationships and the like. I've stated my views on that matter, but my point is that there are things you do and don't do as a matter of good hygiene in a public body. And to my mind, to take important, and to me, there are a few things that we do in this council that are more important than what you're talking about. If we can't get the process of inclusion right, we've got serious problems. And so to have this kind of conversation without the full complement of counselors, to my mind, is just something you don't do. I'm not saying you can't do, which is your point. We can. I'm saying
should.
Well, that's where you and I have to very respectfully disagree. I do not feel we should do this, but I am now not speaking for the entire council. You're getting the benefit of one viewpoint, and that's all. So I just thought I could help by interjecting, but perhaps I haven't.
Well, as far as the legislation is concerned, they see no reason for not considering this. At the very minimum, our recommendation should be in there and say the council has not had the right to review them yet. At the very minimum, they should be in there.
If your point is that it ought to be referenced and it hasn't been, I can see where you're coming from. I really do have to beg off, Judy, just because, again, as a matter of good hygiene in a public forum like this, I have no special status. I just thought I could help.
Thank you.
Great. But I'd like to go. Sorry, was there another comment?
My hand is a new hand raised. I have comments on this.
Okay. Could I jump quickly to Anna, who hasn't had a chance to say anything yet, and then I'll come back, Cheryl. And then I want to hear from more counselors, and Bram, let me get to you in just a moment, Bram, if that's okay. But Ana Mejia, would you like to speak?
My name is Ana Mejia, and I do have thoughts to share, but if Judy feels like whatever she was saying hasn't been resolved, I think it's more important to go back to Judy, and I'm happy to speak after Judy.
Okay, thanks, Ana.
I don't feel that my response has been properly answered, but I would like to hear your thoughts, so please speak.
My thoughts are more with regards to like general representation around this council, and I felt like it was an appropriate time. I have been keeping track of these conversations, watching the recordings of the council meetings, of the just transition, of the biomass task group, and I'll say, Judy, every time that you speak up in those meetings, I really appreciate what you have to share in those meetings. I am a member of the Vermont Renews BIPOC Advisory Council. This council may be familiar with us should be familiar with us because in April of 2021, we submitted a letter that was requesting that this council center racial equity in its climate and environmental policies. In September of 2022, we submitted a follow-up letter to, again, this council, or the chair of this council. And as I said, I've been keeping track of these conversations, and I feel very disappointed in knowing that the content of our letter, it hasn't even been discussed in these spaces. And I want to read an excerpt. It's not the full letter. If you want a copy of the full letter, then please reach out to Kristen. She has a copy of that. And the subject of this letter was the experience of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the legislative process. We write this letter as members of the Vermont Renews BIPOC Advisory Council as a follow-up to a previous letter we sent in April 2021 on the subject of centering racial justice and equity in Vermont climate and environmental policy. We must share our collective disappointment in the state's failure to implement its stated commitments to center racial justice and equity as observed through the following actions. I'm skipping some things because we don't have time, but these feel more relevant to our discussion right now. The Climate Council to date has not made progress towards ensuring adequate representation of frontline communities, BIPOC, low-income, rural, youth, etc., in the council membership. Many appointed members choose to remain in their positions rather than identify representatives from communities most impacted by climate change, which does not reflect the intentions laid out in the adopted Just Transition guidelines. As a reminder, this power differential upholds white supremacy by segregating BIPOC into advisory roles. Our concern is the perpetuation of our exploitation by placing additional demands on frontline communities to do work on behalf of the state without adequate compensation, resources, or authority to make impactful decisions. Furthermore, members of the Renews BIPOC Council have been tokenized at these subcommittee meetings, resulting in at least one individual withdrawing from a committee. And I'm actually referencing myself in that, and I love to speak about my own experience there. But I'll pause. Throughout the biennium, BIPOC and other individuals at the intersection of marginalization, including members of the Renews BIPOC Council, who worked with legislators to develop bills, offered testimony, and advocated for legislation, reported condescending, confrontational, and dismissive responses to their involvement in the public process. We deserve to have a state house that is accessible, inclusive, and respectful to all members of the public. Our involvement and demands of public process should not be met with hostility, while other voices are invited into the process freely and regularly. And that's the excerpt of the letter that I'm going to stop reading. But I wanted to bring this up now today in the January meeting of this Climate Council meeting, because again, I have not heard any conversation about this in these spaces. And because I know that there are 3 seats that are up for appointment, and I really want to challenge you to find the frontline community members to appoint to these spaces. And even if if your seat is not up for appointment, maybe you should consider, is there somebody else who should be in the space, because I've held too much space and bring lots of privilege that I am unable to adequately represent the frontline community members. And I'll say in my own, I've seen, Judy, your name has come up because one time I was requested, or I was nominated to sit on one of these subcommittees. And And it was so tokenizing in the way that they seemed to say, we just need a BIPOC person for these subcommittees. Judy can't be in the Just Transitions Committee because that time doesn't match with her schedule. And so now she's in a different subcommittee. And as I was invited to join that committee, they're like, well, if you participate, the timing doesn't work. So let's move you to another subcommittee. And I attended that meeting. And it was just, it was very condescending me being there. I also heard lots of people referring to, we don't need to talk about equity here because the Just Transition Subcommittee is looking into that and feeling like there's an absolution of their duty to represent marginalized community members, to center equity in their work because there's another subcommittee doing that work. And so I want to bring that to the forefront of your conversations as we're looking at appointment processes. And I don't want to overshadow, what Judy was saying. I was kind of tuning in the background regarding the recommendations and the inclusion of that from the biomass task group, but it did feel important to bring this up now.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to say thank you too, because she's exactly right. What you're doing with these recommendations from the biomass task force feels totally like I was only there as a token. And what I had to say about all of those people who fall into the categories of being impacted by biomass, it is outrageous. You cannot keep excluding. We have a voice. You can't only say you hear us. You have to listen to our voices. This is getting out of hand with this committee.
Thanks, Judy. So, Cheryl, you had another hand up, and then I want to leave some time for the council to react to what they're hearing. So, Cheryl, if there's another point you want to make, let's do that, and then let's offer some, unless
okay.
other folks want to make a comment.
All right. I need to also comment on what Anna and Judy said, and the fact that in the very beginning of this, this process, there was supposed to be equity in every single committee and just transition thought about in every committee. I forgot her name. Judy, what was her name? The woman who did the process with everybody and taught everybody how to keep equity into everything that Kaya, right? It was supposed to be in every conversation, in every subcommittee, and in all of the recommendations. It doesn't belong as something that you look at after the fact. It's something that belongs in all of the conversation all the time. It's not like you don't put it through a lens. You've got to change the way you're thinking. We've got to all change the way we do things, everything that comes out of our mouths and the way we think. I'm not going to talk about that, but that's I could talk more about that. But what I do want to say is these recommendations, the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee had recommendations very similar to what the Biomass Task Group came up with, very similar, and it was suppressed. And they said, okay, well, we're not going to do anything. Instead, there's a task group and they're going to come up with an answer by June, last June, people. And then it kept on going because the scope wasn't even determined by June, probably. But now Biomass Task Group has recommendations that are just about that. They're so similar, it's ridiculous. We've got to stop burning trees. That's the answer. And biofuels. So, but now it's suppressed again. Okay, Ag and Eco recommendations were similar to last year and they were suppressed. Now the recommendations, which are so similar, after 10 months of discovery, and they continue to be left out. It's not comfortable to think here in Vermont that we can't keep cutting down forests and burning trees for whatever it is we want to do with it. But, you know, it's not it's a change. It's a cultural change, and it has to happen, and it has to happen in a just way. What I think that you should do is put the recommendations from Ag and Eco and from the Biomass Task Group into this letter that you're sending to legislature, because now legislature is going to, I don't know what the new affordable heat thing looks like, but if it's anything like the clean heat standard, then it's not going to fly. There are going to be people fighting tooth and nail against it. No biofuels and no biomass. You guys have to start thinking about things in a different way. It's not comfortable, but you have to change. Put those two things into the letter to the legislature, and then say they haven't been approved, but they're going to address it on whatever meeting you say, but put those things in. Don't just make reference to them. Say, these are the two things that we're looking at front and center when we start up again. And that's my recommendation. And also change the way you're thinking and what things you're doing.
Thanks, Cheryl. Okay. Before I jump to the council, I do want to make some time for the councilors to respond to all this comment. Annette, I've seen some things in the chat from you. Is there something you want to say as well?
I wanted to reiterate that, since I didn't know if it was seen. I also, I like what Cheryl Joy just said about putting in both the Biomass Task Force recommendations, which I will note date back to November of 2021. And also the draft recommendation of the Biomass Task Group. But in addition, I think that what needs to be added to this report is that the Climate Council has not discussed biofuels. It is not a part of the Biomass Task Group's charge. That was limited early on. And all of this relates to the heat standard that's being put forward. And I feel very strongly that the legislature should hold off on that until they receive the recommendations of this group. And there has been discussion at the Climate Council in the past about actually talking about biofuels. And since that hasn't happened, I think that it is doing a poor service to the legislators to not have the benefit of something. You're recommending a policy that is supposedly coming from the Climate Council, yet the council itself just has never even talked about biofuels in any substantive way. And so I do hope that you will amend this report to include those two recommendations that have not been adopted yet, and to ask the legislature to hold off on anything having to do with the use of biomass and biofuels until the Climate Council can finish its work on those topics. Thank you.
Thanks, Annette. Okay. All right. So let's use the last minutes we have here to give an opportunity for councilors to react to some of this comment, specifically around the request that the link to the task group recommendations be maintained. There was a request even to put in the stuff that was tabled from over a year ago from Ag and Eco Systems. And then there was the concerns expressed as well by Anna about how it's working in the subcommittees to focus on equity. Bram, you've been super patient with your hand up. So let's turn to you first. I'm not quite sure what was motivating your hand, but I'll give you the first word to react to some of what we're hearing here.
First of all, thank you to Judy and Anna. You can feel the atmosphere of the conversation shift when we get onto that sort of real issue that we have not addressed adequately, and we need to. So thank you for that. I think relative to biomass, I don't see any harm in our report to the legislature. We're reporting where we are, and I don't see any harm at all in saying where we are is the Biomass Task Group has developed these recommendations and including them. And where we are is that the Climate Council as a whole has not had an opportunity to fully work through them yet. And that work is pending the appointment of the empty seats. One other thought I had was, I don't know the speaker's timeline for filling the empty positions, But if that happens in the next couple of weeks, and it could be 2 months, I have no idea. But if it happens in the next couple of weeks, we could in fact schedule a monthly meeting in February with those new people in place to address the biomass task group's recommendations.
Thanks, Bram. Okay. Sue?
I just also wanted to thank folks for their, comments, and to essentially, to verify that while there are 4 out of, I think, currently 9 members of our Just Transition subcommittee that are representatives of the BIPOC community, really none of them have been actively, as I understand it, involved in the task group, although we have had representation on that task group. We've had some, brief sort of briefings on the recommendations, but have never had an engaged discussion. And I think, to Annette's point, we haven't really had a comprehensive discussion around biofuels, either in our subcommittee or, I think, most importantly here. So I would appreciate us maybe considering that. I think what I heard is most fundamentally important is the idea that we begin to think differently and how we need to change the way we think. And I think that has a lot to do with representation on this committee. I am stepping down as the subcommittee chair for the express reason that I don't think a white woman of privilege should be the ongoing chair or co-chair of that. I've been happy to try to facilitate conversation. And related to that, we are waiting for the next appointees to hopefully be more representative and therefore hopefully engage meaningfully in the next phase of what is the role of the Just Transition Subcommittee. It's been difficult, and I think that relates to what we've all talked about in the past, is that we're siloed. And I think that's sort of really going to be something for us to think about if we hopefully get together. What is the role of, and how do we bring the ideas that we've advanced through our very robust discussions with a very diverse group of people around what does a just transition mean and what might it look like, but how do we bring that into our work? So I think that is the evolution, and I think it really depends upon the next appointees to this subcommittee looking certainly different from me and having a different point of view. And I think that's how we're going to evolve. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you for the comments. I personally don't feel comfortable advancing. I haven't had a chance to digest the recommendations. I know they've been in my inbox, and I know I'm responsible and haven't met that obligation, but we as a group haven't had a presentation or a discussion. So I think for me personally, I'm not interested in doing that until I have a chance to learn more. And I think the value that new appointees may bring to that discussion is very important. So I support waiting for that. Maybe it can be February. And I just appreciate the conversation we're having today. Thanks.
I see the Jane, your conference room has a hand up. I'm not sure if that's you or somebody else.
No, it's me, Julie. Can you hear me?
Okay, just speak up as loudly as you can, please.
All right. I will also work on projecting my voice. I just want to make sure everyone's clear on what I understood Jane's recommendation to be, which is not to remove all reference to the work of the biofuels biomass task group, but rather just to remove the links to the report, which, because it's a draft, are likely to change. But my understanding, and encourage Jane to correct me if I'm wrong, is the text would remain in the report. So it's not that it won't be, the work won't be referenced in the ongoing nature of it, just that there's something that could be otherwise construed as a final product. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's helpful. And we can look at that text in just a second. I'm happy to put it up. And Bram put forward another suggestion of, you could include the link and just very explicitly say the council hasn't addressed it. Judy, before I go to your hand, I want to let the council talk for a little bit about this. So give me just 1 second here with Liz and some others, and then I can circle back. But Liz, go ahead.
Just a clarification on what was just said. There's a scope also linked in the document, and my understanding at least, and I think consistent with the discussion we've been having here, the expectation probably is that scope definitely stays in. The paragraph describing the work, including I think it says ongoing for nearly a year, to Judy's point, stays in. And the real question is just, the recommendations Bram points out, we could just leave them in. That's true. They are publicly available and linked through the Climate Council website. I think the point here, and I was one of the people who contacted Jane on this, just for full disclosure, was that it's the only place in the annual report, I believe, where we're linking to something that the council as a whole hasn't considered when it is an annual report of the council. And those draft recommendations are definitely available publicly through the other links on the website. So, looking back, I understand, Judy, the points you were making about the timing. I know as a member of that task force or task group, there were times at which those of us on the task group, and I think you and I shared this concern at the time over the summer, were concerned that there might be premature consideration of some of what the group was doing before we had heard from everybody too. So just wanting to make sure that the impression isn't, because it hasn't been my personal experience that it would be fair to say the reason the draft recommendations haven't been considered yet is all on the fact that the council hasn't taken them up. I do think that the group took a lot of good time hearing from a lot of different individuals in a lot of different presentations that have then informed the recommendations. And while I appreciate they are on the same topics as the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee presented last year, there are some pretty significant, I think, and positive additions in this set of draft recommendations for the council's review. So I don't see it as a year gone by without good effort. I wanted to make sure that point was made. And I do think the draft annual report makes clear the work the subcommittee has done, or the subgroup has done rather, whether the draft recommendations are linked there or remain publicly available elsewhere, as had been my recommendation since they hadn't yet been considered by the council. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. And I'm just showing the document here as it is right now, just so folks can see. And again, what we talked about at the top of the meeting was only thing is just removing that hyperlink. That was the only thing that was discussed at the top of the meeting. Bram, if I understand your suggestion is leave in the hyperlink, but put in a phrase that says the council, the council has not yet and will in the future do it. Kelly, and then let's just double check and figure out what your pathway forward is as a council.
Yes, apologies, and I hope you can hear me. I'm sick day at home, so I'm getting my voice back, but it's not great. I had to step away to put a baby down for a nap when this was discussed earlier, but so I'm just getting caught up. But I think the draft recommendations link, it's pretty clear it's a draft. If we reiterate in this, just saying, and note, this has not been reviewed by the full council. I think linking to it in here is really helpful. We were all invited to a meeting of the biomass task group a while back, and several of us attended. So council members have had a chance to review these recommendations. And so I think if we're very clear, like we've all looked at these task groups, spent a lot of time digging in deep, talking to a lot of people, listening to a lot of feedback, and they worked really hard on these recommendations. And so I see no harm in leaving the link, especially when it's just made explicit. This has not been approved, it's a draft. I don't see how there could be confusion. And I think the benefit is that these can get out in front of people who might be able to start incorporating the thinking sooner rather than later, as we're already into the legislative session here and all of that.
Okay. So can I suggest then as a council, you make a decision here about this particular issue of leaving the link in or not? Earlier, you had agreed in the notes to say, let's take it out for the reasons you discussed previously. Now, based on the public comment from Kelly and Bram, there's a suggestion to actually leave it in, and you could add another sentence that just is more explicit that the council has not as a council, deliberated or made a decision on these yet. So I just want to test folks that were proponents of taking out this recommendation, taking out this link earlier. Could you live with keeping the link in here and adding a sentence that's more explicit about the council not deliberating or making a decision on them yet? Would there be any concerns with leaving this link in and adding that sentence here? I don't know if you can see my cursor, but at the end of that sentence, would there be any concerns about leaving that link in and adding a sentence for clarity? All right. So we're specifically saying, and maybe I'll drop this and share my notes. We're specifically saying, actually leave the hyperlink and add a sentence to clarify that the council hasn't deliberated or made decisions on it. Any concerns about that? Okay. Great. I see hands from Judy and from Leslie Ann. Let me go to Leslie Ann first, just because we haven't heard your voice yet today. Leslie Ann, go ahead, please.
Thanks, David. I just wanted to maybe respond to a lot of the conversation that we've just had, and just hold space for, it's been a really, really emotional and tough and challenging last 45 minutes. And I just wanted to honor and appreciate that. And I think it's maybe the second or third time that we as an entire body and all of our supporting subcommittees, task groups, and folks who are all working together towards the same goal here have come to this point where there's been, I don't want to call it conflict, but there's been stuff that was needed to get out. And I just wanted to really, really appreciate that and lift it up. And I know it wasn't easy to actually listen to, or for the folks who felt comfortable enough sharing with that. Excuse me. And so I just wanted to really have us pause for a sec to sort of not let that disappear into the ether, because part of what we need to do moving forward is to actually think about how to make everybody feel okay. Not just from an expertise perspective, not just from a science perspective, not just from how do you come to the table, but coming to the table at all. And so I just wanted to just have that on the record, that it's a time and point in space where we need to just think a little bit deeply about how we can actually make sure that everybody's okay being at this table. And the folks that are not at the table, how can we make the table more inviting or move the table out? So like I said, I just want to just leave that there, have it sit for a while, because like I said, I know we're not comfortable, but that's okay, because that's how change happens. So I just wanted to offer that up.
Thank you, Leslie Ann. Absolutely. Yeah. So, Judy, you've had your hand up for a bit. If you want to go ahead, we're a little past time, but I'd welcome a final comment from you, and then I'll test if there's any final comments from the council, and then we'll finish up.
Thank you, Leslie Ann, for your comments. Yes, your sentence that you add needs to be clearly state that members of the committee came to our meetings and followed what we were doing, but as a whole, you have not had the opportunity to deliberate together.
Got it.
Because I don't think it would be beneficial to make it sound like you were totally not together.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that clarification, Judy. Okay. Any final comments from counselors before we finish up today's meeting? Okay. Well, Kelly, go ahead, please.
Oh, just a quick question on the process. So I appreciate Judy's point just now, and I wanted to know if we will have a chance to review the actual little sentence that's put in there. Is that something that we could have an opportunity to just, I know it could be getting into the weeds here, but just like a quick thumbs up on how we want to phrase it.
Can we do that right now, Kelly? And I'm just taking notes in real time. And so if anybody has, group edit doesn't work well, but the essence we need to have here, which is, nope, let's leave that hyperlink and add a sentence saying the council as a whole hasn't had a chance to deliberate on them or make a decision about them. And we'll discuss them once we have the new appointments, because those voices are particularly relevant to the conversation. That's the essence of what I've heard folks say.
And to address Judy's comment, maybe it opens with a phrase saying, while individual council members did attend meetings of the biomass task group, comma.
Okay. Sorry for my typing, guys. Okay. Any last concerns about this being the way it shows up? Again, probably in better English than this, but this is the content. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Wonderful. Well, I for one am carrying forward Leslie Ann's words in particular at the end of just now, and carrying those forward with me, and perhaps we all can. And I want to thank everybody for the meeting. And Jane, is there anything else I'm forgetting before we finish up here?
No, that was wonderful. I do just want to acknowledge that I did not have a copy of the letter that Anna was referencing from this September, and have just received it, and will be more than happy to make it available to the council so you can all read the letter at length, and we can use it as a guidepost as we meet and think about future changes we want to make.
Thanks, Jane. Okay. All right, everybody, have a good rest of your day. Thanks so much for the real and meaningful conversations. Thanks everyone who joined the meeting and offered those comments, and we'll see you in our next meeting. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.